All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We have been joined again today very graciously by the great Scott Ritter. We had him on last time. It was more of an informal session trying to introduce our audience to his personality and the work that he's done. But this time around, we will not be speaking to the anti-war activist. We will be speaking to the trained marine, to the trained killer, to Scott Ritter, the military strategist, and we're going to ask him about what he thinks, away from the noise, away from all the media propaganda and debates that we have. What do you think has transpired in the last 1 year? Because we're nearing the 7th of October. Militarily, where does Hamas stand? Where does the IDF stand? Where does Hezbollah stand? And where do we stand with regards to Iran's last escalation and retaliation to the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah? It's a big map. Can you condense it for us and explain to us what's going on, what's going to happen in the future?
Well, first of all, we have to start with the understanding that war is never evaluated in isolation. Only a fool talks about the battlefield in isolation. War is an extension of politics by other means. I didn't come up with that saying, Clausewitz did, but it's also something that Sun Tzu has talked about. Anybody who studies the art of war understands that battles are fought to achieve political ends. So you have to look at it from that perspective. And today, Israel has been strategically defeated. That's the end of the story. Israel on October 6th was looking at a world that had it normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, completing the political objectives of the Abraham Accord, enabling the grand regional geopolitical strategy of implementation of the India-Middle East economic corridor, Middle East-European economic corridor that would make Israel sort of the economic heart of the Middle East. This is what Israel was expecting. No Palestinian state. There was no talk of a Palestinian state. Israel was strangling a Palestinian state to death. Today, everybody's talking about a Palestinian state. Saudi Arabia has said there will be no normalization of relations without the existence of a Palestinian state whose capital is in Jerusalem. Israel today is isolated. Nobody wants to do business with Israel but the United States. Israel is a state that has been labeled accurately so as apartheid in nature and genocidal in behavior. That's by the International Court of Justice, the supreme jurisdiction when it comes to issues of international law, set forth by the United Nations, not made up by Scott Ritter. Iran has just put Israel in its place. If anybody has doubted who has deterrence supremacy in the region right now, Israel or Iran, think no more. Israel has been put on notice that at any time, Iran can hit any place in Israel with anything it wants to achieve whatever objective it wants to. There's nothing Israel can do to prevent this. Israel has implemented a number of what I call trick plays. But anybody who studies sports, I know American football might not be the biggest sport where you are, but I would imagine in soccer there are trick plays as well, or football as you call it. Trick plays are cute. They work once, and they make headlines on TV shows. You don't win championships by using trick plays. You win championships with solid fundamentals. Israel has no solid fundamentals right now. Again, what has Israel accomplished in Gaza? It said its military objectives were the destruction of Hamas militarily and politically. Today, Hamas is more politically relevant than ever. If there were free elections in Palestine today, Hamas would win because Hamas has been singled out by the Palestinians as the only organization willing to fight for Palestinian statehood. The Palestinian Authority certainly is not. President Abbas has zero credibility. He is seen as an extension of the state of Israel. as opposed to a representative of the Palestinian people. Hamas militarily, they're not defeated. They are still killing Israeli soldiers. They have demoralized the Israeli army. They have depleted the Israeli army's ability to maintain its tanks by damaging so many tanks that Israel has run out of spare parts. So I think that's a failure on the part of Israel in Gaza. What did Israel prove? That it can bomb defenseless civilians. We already knew that. All Israel did by bombing defenseless civilians is show to the world the truth of Israel, that it is not a law-abiding member of the international community, but rather a rogue nation willing and able to commit genocide in order to pursue its own unilateral objectives, regardless of what the rest of the world thinks. Again, a victory for Hamas, perhaps the greatest victory, because Hamas has ripped away the veil from the world's eyes about the truth of Israel. Israel is seen for what it is, a brutal, genocidal, murderous entity that has no regard for human life or international law. On October 6th, it'd be very difficult for Hamas to make that claim and have anybody pay attention to it. Here we are, nearly a year later, the whole world understands the truth of Israel. A massive victory for Hamas. The same thing with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has done a brilliant job of escalation management, maintaining pressure on Israel, diverting significant military resources away from the Hamas fight onto the northern border where Israel was not prevailing. Now, what has Israel done? Trick plays. The pagers. I mean, an amazing accomplishment from an intelligence perspective. 15 years in the making. Fake companies, they got into the Hezbollah procurement network. And in one glorious afternoon for the Mossad, they blew up 1,000 or so Hezbollah operatives, killed a handful of them. It's a trick play. Nobody's talking about it today because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Do you think the Israeli soldiers who are bleeding out in southern Lebanon today, as they die, are saying, beep, beep, we got them? No, they're dead. Why? Because Hezbollah wasn't defeated. You don't defeat an entity like Hezbollah with a trick play. They killed Hassan Nasrallah. I mean, it took 84 2,000-pound bombs to do it, but they got him. But Hassan Nasrallah has been saying for more than a decade that he is a dead man walking. He knows Israel was gunning for him, and he fully expected that one day Israel would get him, that he would die a martyr. And he was ready to die a martyr. I'm not minimizing the blow. This is a huge blow. You had the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, during Friday prayers, talking about how much of a blow this was. A great victory for Israeli intelligence and the military. They got Hassan Nasrallah. I think they killed 700 to 1,000 innocent Lebanese civilians doing so. And that's the reality of Israel. Not only that, remember, Hassan Nasrallah had just agreed to a ceasefire negotiated by the United States, which had given Nasrallah and Iran promises that this thing wouldn't happen if Hezbollah was willing to find a path to peace. But apparently Israel wasn't willing to find a path to peace. Netanyahu knew, he was informed by the United States that Hassan Nasrallah had accepted the ceasefire, and yet he ordered Hassan Nasrallah to be assassinated anyways. Why? Under the mistaken belief that by killing Hassan Nasrallah, he would bring down Hezbollah. Again, ask the families of the Israeli soldiers coming home in body bags how that worked out. It didn't. Hezbollah is not defeated. Hezbollah remains. And when you have an Israeli leader define victory as returning 60,000, will never happen because Hezbollah will never be defeated. Israel has already lost. War is an extension of politics, by other means. Israel has lost politically across the spectrum. They haven't won a single thing. They thought that they were going to cripple Hamas, cripple Hezbollah, and be able to intimidate Iran. Iran slapped them down with 200 missiles impacting some of the most sensitive sites in Israel, and there was nothing the vaunted Iron Dome, the ballistic missile defense shield of Israel and the United States combined could do to stop them. Nothing. So military, they haven't won in Gaza. They will never win in Lebanon. And Iran just beat them. So Israel's lost this war. There's no way they're going to reverse this tide. Now, the question is, how do you mitigate this loss so it doesn't become a disaster? And that's a very difficult question because this war is not about Israel. This war has always been, since day one, about Benjamin Netanyahu, about the preservation of his political viability. This man is a disgrace to Israel. He was a disgrace before the war started. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis went to the streets in the lead up to October 7th, demanding his resignation because he was seeking to change Israeli basic law. Why? Because he didn't want to be arrested and prosecuted for credible charges of corruption, he and his wife. He's a corrupt individual, a criminal who understands the moment he steps down as prime minister, the handcuffs will come on. And so he is maintaining this war to maintain his political viability. And when the Israeli people wake up to this reality, and they are already waking up to this reality, it will be over for Benjamin Netanyahu. The sooner Israel can remove him from power and replace him with somebody who is willing to accept reality that Israel will not win this conflict, and the best Israel can hope for is to survive. Israel is not surviving, though. Another aspect of war isn't just politics, but the economy. Israel's economy is devastated. On October 6th, they were looking at becoming the most relevant economic power in the region. The India, Middle East, European economic corridor was going to make them rich beyond belief. Today, the southern port of Eilat is shut down by Ansarallah in their ongoing blockade. Haifa no longer functions because of Hezbollah rocket attacks. 60,000 displaced settlers from the north, tens of thousands displaced from the south, unemployment, 300,000 reservists mobilized, not in their jobs. Israel is a basket case economically. And who's going to invest in Israel going forward? Who's going to invest in a genocidal state? Who's going to invest in an apartheid state? Who's going to invest in a state that will never again know a day of peace? So economically, Israel is finished. And if you can't restore economic stability, then life in Israel itself becomes unsustainable, especially for an immigrant population, because understand that the vast majority of the people who are in Israel were not born in Israel. They come from other locations. They have dual passports. They left a life thinking they would come to the land of milk and honey. Some of them thought they could come and steal the land of the Palestinians, steal their homes, make themselves a new home, live in peace and prosperity. They thought they could go to the beach and, pour oil on their bodies and get beautiful suntans and eat in beachside restaurants and just have a great hedonistic lifestyle. Dance, rave dances on the desert lands next to the poor imprisoned Palestinians as if nobody would notice. No, that life's over. Israel has become a prison for the Jews. And now the Jews are going to leave Israel. And that's the end of Israel. As soon as you get a significant number of Jews going home, not leaving their home because Israel is not their home, it's never been their home, going home, the demographics change. And at some point in time, the notion of a two-state solution becomes ludicrous. And the reality is there will only be a single-state solution to the problem that is Israel. And that single state will be called Palestine. And that's when you will know that Hamas has won this war.
Well, that's a pretty serious case that you've made, and I think it's fair to say that politics, the military aspect is an extension of the politics, and casualties on the ground in isolation might seem one way or another, but in the larger scale, it's the political capital that Israel has burned through, especially in the Western world, in Western parliaments, in Western senates, especially with the average Western voter. I could have never imagined that Palestine would be even on the ballot, even if it's not, even if it's in the top 10, let's say not the top five, but on the American vote, the fact that it's on the ballot, if Kamala Harris potentially loses, it might be because a significant part of the Democratic support is not there anymore because of the failure on Palestine and on the failure when it comes to the Ukraine Russia war. Even with Trump, a lot of the attraction and pull for a lot of young voters was the anti war sentiment, but unfortunately, you don't see that anymore. Right now, it's a race, it's a race to the bottom to try to prove who can shill more for the Israel lobby and for the Israeli government or for Netanyahu. So the political relevance is obvious. I'm asking in terms of pure numbers, what are the casualties on ground looking like? Like, Hamas, we were told, was 50 to 70,000 men strong. They had the Al Ghul sniper. They had such and such rockets, and they were operating in hunter killer teams of 2 to 3 men, and they were doing suicide missions to take out tanks and APCs and to distract units of Israelis and snipe as much as they can. Hezbollah has this whole other strategy. The Israelis have their own thing. What are we looking at in terms of the numbers of people who have perished in this conflict, from Hamas' side, from the Hezbollah side, and from the Israeli side? Because the numbers are kind of fudged up with the IDF. I've seen all the videos. If I just tally up those numbers in my head, I can estimate a couple of thousand at least. Is IDF soldiers have been taken out or wounded very seriously, or are a casualty figure. What do you suspect as a military man are the actual numbers as opposed to the ones that are being reported in the mainstream news?
First of all, when we speak of Gaza, we have to understand that there's more than just Hamas fighting. You have Islamic Jihad, you have other Palestinian factions. So when we speak of the totality of the combatants and the casualties inflicted, many of these casualties come from factions that have nothing to do with Hamas. And so, on the one hand, that means that when we speak of Hamas casualties, I think we have to shrink them and understand that traditionally, in guerrilla warfare of this nature, the aggressing power, whether it be the United States in Vietnam or Israel in Gaza, oftentimes exaggerates casualties because we can't count the bodies. So we come up with some arcane formula about how many artillery shells were put down per square kilometer. And then we say, well, if we fired 10,000 artillery shells, we should have killed X number of militants. So a lot of assumptions are made. I think we need to reduce the Hamas casualties significantly, but then we need to turn around and increase them by noting that many of the people fighting are not trained Hamas operatives. Some of them are equally well-trained Islamic Jihad operatives. Others are lesser trained Palestinians, and many are just civilians who have picked up guns and decided to resist with no training. And amongst the civilians that resist, there will be extraordinarily high casualties. They don't have an infrastructure to fall back upon. They don't have a plan when they engage, and they tend to be killed. The same thing with the lesser trained militants. Their support structure isn't as survivable as Hamas's. Hamas has been planning for this fight for a long time. I will also point out something about Hamas. When this fight first started, people were talking about Hamas having 60 to 90 days worth of supplies. We're now a year into the fight. So either Hamas was much more prepared for this, which I believe is also the case, or Hamas has a continuing ability to resupply, which I also believe is the case, which means Hamas can carry on this fight forever. And that's bad news for Israel. because, again, Hamas's continued existence automatically makes Israel a loser in this conflict, since victory was predicated on the physical destruction of Hamas. I also think that we cannot talk about casualties when it comes to this war unless we want to focus on Israeli casualties. You see, Israel never expected to suffer the casualties they're suffering there. The number of dead may be similar to what Israel has broadcast, because it's very difficult in a small nation like Israel to hide the death of a soldier. And so I'm willing to say that Israel is relatively honest about its dead soldiers. The number that Israel is hiding are the wounded soldiers. They're not talking about the number of wounded. That number can be between 7,000 and 12,000. And we're talking about extraordinarily seriously wounded people, people who will never walk again, people who will lose arms, people who have to be cared for by society. And Israel is not used to taking this number of casualties. If there is a full-scale war in Lebanon, these will go up by an order of magnitude, both in terms of dead and wounded. Modern warfare is horrible. The physical damage it does to a human body is beyond comprehension. But the miracles of modern medicine mean that people that would have died even 20 years ago will live if they're given treatment. And Israel has a very effective casualty evacuation scheme. So they are able to evacuate wounded, get them to treatment, and these men and women survive. But now their continued life is a constant reminder to Israel of its ongoing failure, the failure to defeat Hamas. And it's the wounded that will actually break the spirit of the Israelis, not the dead. The dead are in the ground. You mourn the dead. The wounded are a constant reminder of your failure. And I think that's the real casualty tally that matters for Israel. For Hamas and for the civilians of Gaza, the pain and suffering that they are that are incurring is beyond imagination. But I will say this: you're not going to break the Palestinian people by killing their civilians. That just simply isn't going to happen. In fact, what history has shown is the more you bomb people, the more you subject them to torture and horrors, the more resilient they become in the defense of their cause. Hamas has acknowledged that they have more than replaced their casualties through new recruits, that people are joining Hamas to replace those who have fallen. So Hamas's numbers are going to be roughly the same as they were when this conflict started, which means Israel's not even close to winning this conflict, the physical destruction of Hamas. But the more important is the people of Palestine, people of Gaza. You know, what are they willing to suffer to be free? Because that's the question. And did they consider themselves to be free on October 6th? I believe that the average Gazan understood where they lived and understood the conditions in which they lived. Sinwar, the leader, wrote a book, Carnation and the Thorn, when he talks about the children of the camps. Everybody who lived in Gaza was a child of the camp. They were born into these camps. They were prisoners from the day they were born. And without October 7th, they'd be prisoners the day they died. To spend your entire life as a prisoner, knowing that whatever life you brought into this life, the next generation would be prisoners too. Is that really a life worth having? What would you do? What sacrifices would you make so that your children or your grandchildren could live free in a homeland called Palestine? And that's the fundamental question that has to be asked. And I think the Palestinian people have answered it. You will survive. You will try to live. You will die if necessary, in horrific numbers. I mean, the numbers today, 40 to 190,000, depending on who's doing the math. These are gigantic numbers, but I oftentimes use the analogy of France in World War II and the Normandy invasions, D-Day, as the Allies, the Americans, the Brits, the Canadians, were talking about storming ashore the Normandy beaches to begin the process of liberating France. Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the Free French, was approached by Dwight D. Eisenhower, who briefed him that between 60 and 120,000 French civilians were going to die in this campaign, innocent French civilians. But what the Allies had to do in terms of bombing urban areas, disrupting rail traffic, disrupting logistics, etc., the fighting that would take place on the ground, 60 to 120,000 French civilians were going to die. He told this to de Gaulle to find out how de Gaulle would react. De Gaulle signed off on the invasion plan. He never once attended a reunion of D-Day because he could never forgive himself for signing off on the deaths of so many French, although he understood that France would not be free unless those Frenchmen died. I believe that's the attitude of the Hamas leadership. They have started something by attacking Israel on October 7th, knowing, taking hostages back to Gaza. They knew that Israel would follow them back in. They wanted Israel to follow them back in. They needed Israel to follow them back in because they needed Israel to behave as only Israel could. Murderous, genocidal, to do what Israel has done, to lose the faith of the world. Hamas needed that to be in the position they are today of political relevance. They had to sacrifice tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians so that the survivors could be free. And that's why talking about casualties is really a moot point. The Palestinians will lose as many Palestinians as need to be lost in order to ensure the existence of a Palestine. The Israelis will suffer their casualties, and those casualties will break the spirit. The Lebanese, this is a more difficult problem, you see, because in 2006, when Israel fought its war with Hezbollah, the Israeli government embraced the policy of Dahwa, named after the southern suburb of Beirut, where there's a lot of Shia who are loyal to Hezbollah are. The Dahwa doctrine, collective punishment. And they just pounded the Lebanese capital of Beirut, and inflicting tens of thousands of casualties. And even though Hezbollah emerged from that conflict with its reputation enhanced because it once again fought the Israeli army to a standstill, forcing the Israelis to retreat, there was bitterness amongst the Lebanese about the price they had to pay, especially since the conflict was started by a Hezbollah raid that captured some Israeli soldiers and brought them back, triggered by Hezbollah action. And from 2006 onwards, Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah had been working to repair their relations with the Lebanese people. Hezbollah is a political party, not just a militant organization. And they ended up doing quite well in Lebanese elections. They are part of the Lebanese government, a critical part of the Lebanese government. They have a large number of seats in the Lebanese parliament. And they have become one with Lebanon, meaning that Hezbollah isn't just about the Shia in the south, but Hezbollah is about all of Lebanon, looking what's best for Lebanon. And that's one of the reasons why Hassan Nasrallah had managed this conflict the way he did, avoiding massive escalation, seeking just to manage the escalation ladder. Israel is bombing the Lebanese capital. Israel is killing thousands of Lebanese civilians. These civilians have nothing to do with Hamas. They're Lebanese. Israel is doing this in hopes of dividing Lebanon, splitting them away from Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah. They killed Hassan Nasrallah in hopes that those Lebanese who rallied behind Hezbollah did so only because of the charisma of Hassan Nasrallah. I guess in the long term we'll find out if they succeeded. But my current assessment is that they have failed. That the Lebanese people identify with Hezbollah's resistance, that they don't view this as an us versus them. When Israel attacks Lebanon, attacks Hezbollah, the Lebanese say they are attacking us. And this is, again, a great failure on the part of the Israelis, a huge failure on the part of the Israelis. Every bomb they drop on Beirut only stiffens the resolve of the Lebanese to resist the Israeli aggression and to support not only Hezbollah, but Iran in terms of holding Israel to account for its actions. And lastly, not lastly, then we can move on to Ansarallah, sort of the dark horse in all of this. When this conflict started on October 7th, who amongst us thought we'd be talking about Ansarallah and the Houthi? They were embroiled in their fight with the Saudis, and suddenly they become one of the more relevant players on the field. What they have done in terms of effecting a naval blockade of Israel is unprecedented. They have defeated the United States Navy. Who would have thought? When I say defeat, they didn't sink all of the American ships, but the United States Navy was deployed to deter and punish, to compel the Houthi to stop their blockade. The U.S. Navy is left. The Houthi still sink ships. Who won that fight? Not only that, but they are launching their own rockets into Israel, punishing Israel. The same thing with the Iraqi popular militias that support, that are pro-Iranian. They're firing into Israel. And then there's Iran. Iran that I think was taken by surprise by October 7th. Iran, which took a while to figure out where they were on this fight. They knew they wanted to support, but they also knew that they were pivoting strategically towards Eurasia with BRICS and a reconciliation with the Saudis. And they were looking at, hopefully a future that was built around peaceful coexistence, not conflict. But Israel's own gross criminal actions in targeting Iran, bombing an Iranian consulate in Damascus, assassinating Hamas leadership in Tehran, killing Hassan Nasrallah, has created the conditions where Iran not only has entered the escalation management game, they said it's over. There is no more escalation management. It is now existential. The next time this happens will be the last time it happens. Iran is done playing games. Iran has voted. We will destroy you. And they sent a signal on October 1st that backed that up. They hit every target they were aiming at. And the next time they shoot at Israel, it will be not just 200, probably 1,000 or 2,000 rockets that come in. They hit not just empty airfields, but critical infrastructure, energy plants, oil production, gas distribution, water desalination. Israel will cease to exist as a modern nation state if they continue to escalate with Iran. Who would have thought this back on October 6th? Nobody. But where we are today and where we were then, it's a whole new world. It's a world where Israel has lost the strategic advantage.
I'm going to ask you about two things. One is the element of the sacrifice. You mentioned that civilian sacrifices as well as the combatants. It's all a moot point because at the end of the day, it's about freedom and this collective idea of having a Palestinian identity or a Lebanese identity or an Iranian identity. And then you also mentioned how the resolve of the Palestinian people increases with the amount of civilian casualties because it becomes abundantly clear to them what the other side of the situation would be like if they had to deal only with Israel, if they didn't have Hamas on their side. With the Lebanese, you also mentioned the history of the Christian and Shia militias fighting amongst each other and the potential sort of rift that exists in the Lebanese front, on the Lebanese front. However, in Iran, the cost that they've suffered is not so immediate. The Iranian people have suffered due to both external sanctions as well as to the extreme sort of social policies of the religious government that is the Irani regime, the mullah regime. So in Iran, don't you think it's much more of a sensitive issue to face something potentially not like a coup but a counter revolution. You saw it with the CIA supporting the hijab protests and the murder of Mahsa Amini. And it's not to say that there's not violence being carried out by the government against their own people. There is. But don't you think there's more of a potential in Iran? Because will they be able to sustain this sort of militarism? Because you argued that they were going towards normalization and they were taken aback by the 7th of October. But there's a whole other argument that people gave, that experts gave even, that Iran green lighted the operation because it needed another big conflict to keep its domestic politics as well as its politics in the Middle East going. And that Saudi normalization had in it the package deal of, there has to be a second Palestinian homeland or a state or some idea of a Palestinian state. That was part of the direct agreement between Israel and Saudi. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I'll push back against anybody who thinks that Iran greenlighted this. There's no evidence whatsoever to sustain that. All the evidence points in the other direction. Um, we can start with Iranian Saudi Arabian reconciliation. That's that is a move that points away from confrontation, trying to dismantle the Sunni shield that was put up against the Shia crescent. Look at Iran joining BRICS and in their pivot to Eurasia. That is their economic lifeline. That's how they're going to overcome sanctions. You don't do that if you're getting ready to get bogged down in a conflict against Israel of an existential nature. I had I participated in a meeting with President Raisi in September of 2023. And it was a very frank discussion that he had with a group of Western journalists and academics. And at no time was any of this indicated. Now, it's not as though he tells us secret plans of leader speaks. The credibility of the Iranian nation is on the line, and he wouldn't host a meeting of this nature only to put forward simple propaganda that would then immediately be contradicted. That would be humiliating for him. So I disagree with that. I think the Iranian government was not ready for October 7th. And that you can see that with the hesitancy of their response, the debates that had to take place within Iran about how to proceed. Even up until the last moment, there was a significant faction in Iran led by the new Iranian president that was opposed to this action. Again, if this was part of Iran's strategic plan, strategic plans don't happen, with only a small number of people in the nation knowing about it. That's not how Iran works. That the president would have known about it because the president sits on both the National Security Council and the Expediency Council, Discernment Council, both of which advise the supreme leader. So the idea that the Iranian presidency would have been kept out of the loop about something as important as supporting Hamas and starting a major conflict with Israel is ridiculous. Iran knew nothing about this. That's my firm belief. And their incremental response to this is proof positive. But that argument's over. Iran now has decided, and they've made their decision. About the internal problems with Iran, let there be no doubt there were major issues following the death of the Kurdish girl in police custody who was arrested because of the hijab issue. And there were demonstrations, and there still are issues. Look, the current Iranian president ran on a platform of addressing this very problem. He said, "I will address this issue." So it's clear that this resonates politically, but to pretend that everything that happened inside Iran in 2023 was the byproduct of the genuine will of the Iranian people is absurd in the extreme. The CIA, the Mossad, British intelligence, Dutch intelligence, Pakistani intelligence, all intelligence has been involved in undermining, Iran. Let's not pretend that the Pakistanis don't play games in Baluchistan. It's a two-way street. The Iranians play games as well. But let's just not pretend that Baluchistan happens in a vacuum. We know what the Pakistani intelligence does. We know what Israeli intelligence does with the Kurds, with the Azeris. We know what the United States intelligence does with the monarchists and the Arabs. All of these rose up against the Iranian government as part of this popular revolt. Raisi talked about this. He called it one of the greatest threats to the Iranian regime in modern history, the greatest threat to Iran since the Iran-Iraq War. But Iran won. And they won because the vast majority of the Iranian population supports the theocracy, supports the Islamic Republic. And even those who have problems with the Islamic Republic aren't willing to betray the Islamic Republic by taking the 30 silver pieces from foreign intelligence services. So the fact of the matter is Iran is as strong as it has ever been. We did see low turnout in the election, the first round, because I don't think the people believed that the theocracy would allow a moderate reformist to become president. But when he emerged into the second round, you saw how many people came out, because now they had hope and they voted for him, and he's in power today. And now you've seen what Israel has done. You've seen the popularity of the resistance, the axis of resistance. Anybody who thinks that the Iranian government is weak today, doesn't have the full support of the Iranian people, didn't look at Friday prayers. If you saw what I saw on Friday prayers, it wasn't just Tehran that was rallying, it was the nation that rallied behind the supreme leader. I think anybody who thought that this conflict would somehow drive a wedge into Iranian society and be the beginning of the end of the theocracy thought wrong. In fact, the theocracy today is stronger than it has ever been since the end of the Iran-Iraq War, because they have done two things. One, they have stood up to Israel. They have stood up to Israel. Prior to this, nobody could make that claim except Saddam Hussein, and he got hung by the neck until dead. Iran fired 200 missiles into Israel, establishing Islamic dominance over the Zionist entity. That resonates everywhere. You know what the first thing that happened after that? Saudi Arabia reached out and said, all of our problems are in the past. All of our problems are in the past. We're done. We're with you, moving forward. Why would Saudi Arabia do that? Because Iran just established itself as the dominant moral and military power in the region. No Arab leader has the credibility amongst the Islamic world than the supreme leader today, because no Arab leader other than Saddam Hussein, who is dead, has ever had the gumption to stand up to Israel and attack Israel and defeat Israel, because Israel was defeated on October 1st. The missile defense shield did not work. No, the theocracy today is firmly entrenched, stronger than ever. And now what you're going to see at the end of this month is Iran is going to be part of the BRICS redefinition of the world global order. Global geopolitics changes forever on October 22nd and 24th in Kazan. And Iran will be sitting at the table, a member of this multipolar, consensus-driven, society. Iran is safe. Iran is almost untouchable because of the leadership and the policies and the decisions made by the Iranian government, the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the theocracy.
This is a big claims, man. I don't know if I agree with all of them, but I think you have more experience with this. I think it's funny that you mentioned Saddam being the only successful Muslim leader to hit back against Israel and assert dominance over it. And it's quite funny that the Iranians were, helped in toppling him and then eventually leading to his execution. And now they've sort of taken up his role in Iraq and in the Middle East as well. That notwithstanding, what do you think Israel's response is going to be? Because even I was skeptical I had expected by now that Israel would have just all out attacked Iran by now already. I thought they wouldn't even wait the night. And I wouldn't have believed anything that you've said up until this point. But only because of the fact that they're not responding. It's quite shocking to me as a layperson, as a regular, civilian with no military experience or understanding. Why aren't they responding? They're usually very quick to respond. It's very un-Israel like. Do they actually seem a bit shaken up? Is it the Americans? Are they not supporting them? What's the problem here?
Did you see Benjamin Netanyahu's hands when he gave the address after he was attacked from the bunker?
When he addressed the Irani people?
October 1st? Shaking. Did you hear his voice? Trembling. Because he was briefed on what happened. He knew that the missile defense shield has failed. He knew that Nevatim Air Base, we now know 32 impacts. 32. We don't know on the other base, but it'll probably be a similar amount. He knows that Israel was defenseless. He knows that. Now you say Israel responds. With what? Do you know how far away Iran is from Israel? You see, Iran has rockets that when they're launched, they will fly the distance, no problem. Israel has to put pilots in an aircraft, fly that aircraft over hostile territory because it doesn't have a border. Saudi Arabia will not allow Israel to fly over Saudi airspace. So it's going to be over Jordan and then into Iraq. But Iraq, even though the United States controls that airspace, the United States will have to stand down because the other nations told them to stand down. Iran will be able to project its forward defenses into Iraqi airspace. How does Israel get into Iran? With what? How many F-35s do they have? You see the point I'm trying to get. The F-35 would have to be refueled. Where is that refueling going to take place? Over Iraqi airspace? What if the Iranians decide to fly in there and shoot down the refuelers? Then Israel has to put fighters up there to protect that. How long can those fighters stay on combat air patrol without refueling? It's a long distance away. Have you ever flown a combat sortie? Talk to the Pakistani pilots who have. It's not like flying a commercial airliner. You're flying a profile, okay? It consumes fuel. You're coming in on a target route that intelligence is briefed is avoiding air defense. So you're going up, down, terrain masking, using fuel. You drop your bomb, you don't get to hang around. You got to get the hell out of there, burning fuel. And if your refueler's gone, your plane is gone, you're dead. What the hell is Israel going to do? With what? Everybody talks as if the Israelis are the greatest superpower on the face of Damascus because they can come in over the Golan Heights. Go to Iran, Israel, and die. That's the reality. And here's the different thing, too. The entire Israeli package was based upon Iranian defenses defined by S-300 type capabilities. S-300 is a Russian surface-to-air missile. The Russians just provided the Iranians with a significant number of S-400s. Together with sophisticated electronic warfare packages, going to jam the Israelis as they come in, backed up by Su-35 fighters. Now, here's the thing. How many Iranians have been trained on the operation of the S-400? I'll give you a quick hint. None. Who's operating the S-400 on Iranian soil? I'll give you another hint. The Russians. Who's flying the S-35s? Not Iranian pilots, Russians. So now Israel, to attack Iran, is going to have to go head-to-head with Russia. You think Israel wants to do that? You think Israel's ready to do that? Do you think the United States is willing to let them do that? Now, what is Israel going to bomb? Are they going to bomb the nuclear site? That's the end of Israel. Israel disappears that quick. You understand the first Israeli bomb that drops on Iran, over 500 missiles will immediately be fired. These are solid rocket fuel missiles. You can immediately reload, fire 500 more within 15 minutes. That's 1,000 missiles impacting every strategic site in Israel within 30 minutes of the first Israeli bomb dropping. The Israeli airplane won't even be halfway home before his entire country is destroyed. That's going through the mind of Benjamin Netanyahu. You want to know why he didn't order the attack? Because he can't order the attack. He's got nothing to attack with. Iran holds all the cards. Now let's factor in the Americans. Joe Biden, he stepped aside because he knows he's not viable as a candidate for the presidency. His vice president, Kamala Harris, has been the one that was selected by the Democratic Party to run. The Democrats understand that if Donald Trump wins, that could be a fatal blow to their party, to their institution, to their establishment. That Donald Trump will seek to deconstruct everything they've been fighting to build in America, their vision of America. This is as existential as it gets. If they lose this election, it's over for the Democratic Party. So they're going to let Benjamin Netanyahu bomb Iranian oil, knowing that Iran will shut down Middle East oil, plunging the world into an economic crisis, plunging America into a depression, causing prices to explode 30 days out of an election? In 1992, James Carville was advising then candidate Bill Clinton. And on the war room, he put a sign on the war room reminding, because Clinton was talking about foreign policy, foreign policy, foreign policy. He said, it's the economy, stupid. Americans are going to vote their pocketbooks. And I'll tell you what, if Israel bombs Iranian oil, gas is going to be $12 a gallon and going up. All the people getting ready for winter wanting to put oil into their heating, into the reservoirs, can't afford it. Prices in the market go up. America, a lot of Americans are one failed missed paycheck away from bankruptcy and insolvency, losing their homes and everything. You really think Joe Biden wants that America to exist on election day? You don't think he's picking up the phone telling Netanyahu, if you do this, I will personally kill you? Israel isn't going to do anything because Israel can't do anything, not like what they claim. Israel will do what it always does. First thing they tried to do is to kill Hassan Nasrallah's replacement. All they succeeded in doing is killing dozens of more of innocent Lebanese. But they will continue to do that. You may see Israel going back to some covert operations, assassinating some people. I imagine that Iran's ballistic missile organization is top on their list, so you might see some scientists get killed, heads of the ballistic missile, maybe some Republican Guard people getting killed by Mossad operatives in Tehran. You might see some sabotage of factories. This is what Israel is capable of doing. But if you're fantasizing about Israeli aircraft flying over Iran, dropping bombs, you've been smoking some bad dope, because that just isn't going to happen. It can't happen because Iran has shown Israel that if they do that, Israel ceases to exist. It's as simple as that.
Well, that's just that's a strong message. I guess you're right, because Israel would have responded by now if they wanted to. And subterfuge, sabotage, espionage, that's about it. That's about the scope of what they can do, simply because of the distance between Iran and Israel, and because Iran has invested a lot in hypersonic ballistic missiles. I think they're able to retaliate that way. It's not so bleak a picture. The numbers are bad. We've lost a lot of people. Things aren't looking very good in the Muslim world. The morale is very low. People are very... I'll give you an example for Pakistan. People are very... they're completely disenfranchised from the governments. For Palestine being one of many reasons. Do you see this conflict becoming bigger than it is? And we hear all this talk of it becoming a regional, bigger conflict, reaching all the way to Iran. Do you see the Americans jumping into it?
No, I see the Americans trying to jump out of it. First of all, again, what are we going to jump in with? What do we got? Aircraft carriers? You don't think hypersonics solve that problem too? Do you know why we got our aircraft carriers out of the region? Because if our aircraft carriers are there and Israel decided to respond, we'd have to support them, and then our carriers become targets to missiles we can't defend against, and we lose our aircraft carriers. How do you expect us to jump into this region? With airplanes? Well, they have to operate out of a base. Al Udeid base in Qatar? You don't think that's in range of Iranian missiles that were just proven incapable of being shot down? Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet, they'll all die. All of our little bases in Syria and Iraq are exposed and vulnerable right now. What are we going to jump in with?
Is
The
this
82nd Airborne Division?
is this shaping up to be another Syria? Like you mentioned, that there's a potential that the S-400s as well as the Sukhoi 35s are being the Sukhois are being operated by the Russians inside of Iran. Do you think that this is becoming another Syria situation of a long stalemate kind of war?
No, I don't think so. Because Iran is not, Assad had been devastated by years of internal fighting. The Assad regime was almost driven to its knees. Russian intervention saved it. But Turkey was already entrenched. The Americans are entrenched. The al-Nusra is entrenched in Idlib. And so you already had well-defined positions that created the conditions for stalemate. Iran is far different. First of all, there's nobody on Iranian soil but Iranians. There's no American base on Iranian soil. There's no Israeli base. There's no foreign base. So the Russians are there, just basically because they promised they have a strategic relationship with Iran. Iran has assisted Russia with the provision of military equipment, assisted, politically, geopolitically, and so Russia has come to their assistance. I think the goal will be to get Iranians trained on the S-400 and get Iranians flying the S-35s and having the Russians go home. Russia's not looking for a permanent base in Iran, and Iran doesn't want Russians to be there permanently. So I don't think that this is shaping up to be another Syria. I think what Iran is doing is trying to freeze the situation militarily, knowing that Israel is destroyed politically. See, Iran doesn't need to go to war with Israel. All Iran has to do is keep the situation where it is today, where Israel bleeds to death in Lebanon, bleeds to death in Gaza, and loses the support of the world because all Israel knows how to do is bomb innocent civilians. And as long as Iran freezes that situation, Iran gets stronger through BRICS, Israel gets weaker through genocide.
Where do you see the conflict going? And I know that's a really vague question, but I need a little bit of punditry here. What like we're bombarded with information constantly, and it's all like 100 different outcomes of the conflict, and they're all equally true. That they all seem equally true to the rational mind. What do you, Scott Ritter, the expert, think in this situation? What is Israel's next move? What is Iran's next move? What is Lebanon's next move? What is Hamas's next move? What are the Americans going to do? Is everyone just waiting around for the American elections? Is that what's happening?
I don't know if Israel can wait around till the American election, because this is about Benjamin Netanyahu and his political survival. And his job right now is to create enough chaos that he can manipulate Israeli public opinion into allowing him to remain as the prime minister of Israel. The truth is starting to come out about the Iranian missile attack. If you remember, on the first day, the Americans and the Israelis said, "Oh, we shot them all down. Nothing hit. There was no damage done." Then Israel came out a couple of days ago and said only three warheads hit Nevatim. Now it turns out 32 hit Nevatim. Some of those warheads hit, aircraft shelters where F-35 aircraft may have been in. And we're going to find out more and more about, how effective the Iranian missile attack was. This creates a huge political problem for Netanyahu. He will seek to overcome that by pushing harder into Lebanon. He had briefed the Israeli people that Hezbollah was defeated, Hassan Nasrallah was dead, the pagers had demoralized them. And yet all we see is helicopter evacuation flights coming out of Lebanon. Um, I think Hezbollah has sucked Israel into a trap. Now, Israel has blown up a couple tunnels coming out of Lebanon that were going into Israeli towns. My understanding is that Hezbollah was always planning on taking the fight to Israel. I think Hezbollah had significantly more than two tunnels, though, and I believe that at some point in time, Hezbollah will take the fight into Israel. And when you have Hezbollah operatives taking over Israeli villages, Israeli towns, occupying Israeli soil, this will be a devastating blow to Benjamin Netanyahu. Hamas is far from defeated. I think yesterday we saw, for the first time in some time, Hamas firing rockets from the south into Israel. How do they continue to fire rockets a year into this conflict? Because they're not defeated. This will create a very dangerous situation where it may defy what logic dictates. And what I mean by that is that he may seek to strike Iran. When you are in a corner, when you are desperate, you can deceive yourself. Right now, I think he understands and he's been told the truth about what Iran is capable of doing. Iran has made it clear. They've communicated to everybody what the consequences of an Israeli strike will be. But if Netanyahu is pushed into a corner where his only chance to continue to deceive the Israeli people about his viability as a leader is to expand the conflict into Iran, we may very well see an Israeli attack on Iran designed to expand this conflict. This is a very dangerous situation. Israel also possesses nuclear weapons, and I am very concerned that at some point in time, especially if he plans on striking Iran, that he may seek to do so preemptively using nuclear weapons against Iran's hardened nuclear sites. The reason why I say this is that it's my belief that Iran is reconsidering its posture on nuclear weapons, that Iran understands the threat that is posed by Israel's nuclear weapons, and that the only way Iran could deter an Israeli nuclear attack is by possessing a nuclear capability of its own. And I think Israel, in seeing that, there is going to be pressure in Israel to launch a preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear infrastructure, using near-term potential of an Iranian nuclear threat. This is my greatest fear. The United States has been incapable of finding a diplomatic off-ramp that is politically viable for Netanyahu. Europe has no influence whatsoever in the region at all. Russia and China are busy focused on BRICS and trying to get BRICS born, so to speak. And there's a vacuum marker down on the table, and it's a serious marker. But Israel can't accept that. That's the reality. Benjamin Netanyahu cannot survive accepting that marker at face value. He will have to do something. I don't think he has the time to come up with some clever covert action. I think at the end of the day, within the next month, he will be called upon to make a decision to strike Iran, to escalate this conflict. He may choose to do it closer to the election, to minimize the ability of the United States to interfere. But that's my biggest concern. If he doesn't do this, then I think what you're going to see is everybody waiting for the election to see what happens in the election. Is it going to be Kamala Harris? Is it going to be Donald Trump? With Kamala Harris, I think we're going to see more of the same, confusion, et cetera. If it's Donald Trump, I think you're going to see a lot of people understanding that the game itself may change totally when Trump becomes president, and both the Iranians and the Israelis will be working along with the rest of the world to convince Trump that further escalation is not desirable. But my biggest concern is Benjamin Netanyahu and where he stands politically, and the threat that he faces, and that within the next 30 days we could see a very dangerous a decision made by Benjamin Netanyahu, which he feels is designed to save his political future, a wider war.
If Netanyahu tries to trigger a wider war by attacking potential nuclear facilities or oil facilities and potentially using the secret nukes that Iran has that people have been claiming for a decade now or more, in fact, wouldn't that be political suicide? Because in this whole worldview that you've created, it always seems like Israel is an irrational actor, which I am partial to believe. But at some point, rationality has to prevail in Israeli decision making. No, like if they were to threaten Iran with potentially nuclear weapons, wouldn't they be ensuring political suicide for the entity that is Israel? I mean, so forget a future prospect of a political, career for Netanyahu. Existentially, there would be no more of a political problem to be dealt with.
Well, remember, we have people like former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who is calling this a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is the chance, he says, for Israel to destroy Iran, to eliminate Iran, to remove it from the playing board. And there are many other Israelis that believe the same thing. These are people who are viewing this existentially. These are people who understand that the status quo is actually bad for Israel. And that the only chance Israel has of succeeding, and success is defined by not just surviving, but by achieving the goals and objectives of a greater Israel, one where there is no Palestine. That to do that, they need to eliminate Iran as a threat. And so it has to govern. I think Israel is a nation governed by irrational actors, and that we have to be very careful about irrational decisions being made.
What would that look like? What would be the practical steps with which they would deliver said payload? What would be the mechanism of action, and what would be the retaliation if something like that were to happen within the region? What would a nuclear Pakistan do, for example? I wouldn't say that you're an expert on Pakistani foreign policy, but what does that look like for the region? We're neighbors with Iran. And as you mentioned, we already have games going on in the Balochistan with each other. What would be the mechanism of action by which Netanyahu attacks Iran, and what would be the reaction in the wider world?
How many nations have shown the ability to act decisively? Very few. In fact, look at Iran. The decisive action they took on October 1st was still a measured action. It wasn't the decisive action. They were still looking for an off-ramp. I think if Israel were to attack Iran decisively, using nuclear weapons preemptively, for instance, what would Pakistan do? Well, the question is, what is Pakistan prepared to do? Have they discussed this scenario? Has the Pakistani government sat down and said, okay, if Iran is struck with nuclear weapons, what is our position? What is our strategy? Do we retaliate with our nuclear weapons against Israel? Well, if so, then why aren't you using that as a deterrent right now, letting Israel know that if you do strike Iran with nuclear weapons, you become a target to Pakistani nuclear weapons? But I don't hear this coming out of the Pakistani leadership, which tells me they're not thinking about it, because they are probably saying it's too crazy. Netanyahu would never seek to do something like this. So once it happens, now the question that Pakistan will have to ask itself is that if it begins to posture aggressively towards Israel, will Israel preempt them by hitting them with nuclear weapons as well? And then Pakistan has to wonder about, does Israel then, is it colluding with India to try and isolate Pakistan? I don't think the Pakistani government's having these conversations. They should be, but they're not. I think they're worried about Imran Khan. I think they're worried about domestic problems. They're worried about anything but, what will happen next door in Iran from an Israeli nuclear attack, because I think they're just saying that's crazy. That would never happen. And that's half of the Israeli gamble, is to act decisively, act boldly, take everybody by surprise, and then confront them with a fait accompli. We can no longer talk about saving the Islamic Republic because we destroyed the Islamic Republic. Now that that has been established, let's talk about how we go forward from there. And if you're not ready to have that conversation, Israel wins. And I think that's the audacity that the Israeli government would be banking on to prevail. I think it's insanity. I'm not supporting this at all. I'm just saying that Israel is a nation that's looking its existential survival, looking and saying we may not survive the next year or two if this current situation continues, if our economy collapses. We have to do something to turn this around, and we're not going to be able to do it using the tactics and methodologies that we're using to date. Iran just checkmated us with their missiles. We have to change the calculus by removing Iran from the game board. I think we know that's what the Israelis are thinking. Whether or not they're actually able to, execute that, I hope the answer is no. But my biggest worry is that is the direction that Israel will be heading.
Would this be described as a Samson option thing?
It's a derivative of the Samson option. It's what I would call a preemptive Samson option. Samson option, it was always, if Israel is going to die, they're going to take everybody down with them. But that's an option that's considered at the heat of the moment, meaning, Israel is dead. Mr. Prime Minister or Madam Prime Minister, we've lost the war. They're coming down the hallway to kill you. Fire the Samson option, take them down with us. That's that. I think we're in a much more precarious situation where you have Israeli leaders saying, Mr. Prime Minister, if we allow this situation to continue for another 2 to 3 years, Israel will no longer exist. Iran is the problem, and therefore we have to eliminate Iran. Conventionally, we can't do that. The only option we have to eliminate is using the nuclear weapons. It's sort of a Samson option, because if they don't use nuclear weapons to eliminate Iran, Israel will go away, could be defeated. So sort of a preemptive Samson option. And I think that's part of the Israeli mindset. These are people who place themselves above all else. The fact that they have a Samson option lets you know that they can't imagine a world where Israel doesn't exist, that they will destroy any world that doesn't want Israel to exist. So if they're facing a situation where by failing to defeat Hamas, defeat Hezbollah, by being intimidated by Iran, by Ansarallah able to strangle them economically, that their existential survival is called into question, then I think a derivative of the Samson option is very much on the table.
So whatever is going to happen is going to happen within the next month. It's going to be decisive, you think, the next month in determining the direction of the war.
That the next month is the period of greatest uncertainty because of the American elections. After the American elections, we'll even though we have a period of time between November and January where the next president is sworn in, the vacillations of American policy become more unlikely. We'll either know it's a Harris presidency, in which case the Biden administration will be seeking to get the Harris administration established on the strongest footing possible, or be a Trump administration. The world will be responding based upon that new reality. So we'll see what happens.
You always jokingly refer to the Trump administration being an absolute game changer, because not in a positive or negative sense, but just in a sort of a curveball sense. Can you elaborate as to how big this curveball would be and what kind of direction we might take potentially? Is it going to swing left or swing right?
Well, first of all, domestically, Trump will be challenging, established elites that have big influence in American foreign policy, American economic policy. Remember, if Trump gets elected, he's a one-term president. He doesn't care. And so the idea that he's going to be playing politics with Congress and playing this and playing that, he's a one-term president. And he is so narcissistic that the idea of him building something that could be handed off to J.D. Vance just doesn't enter his mind. This will be all about Donald Trump. And so he is going to seek to imprint himself on as many issues as possible. And but he's also somebody that, look, with North Korea during his first term, he threatened fire and fury, nuclear war. And then he turned around and he met with Kim Jong-un 3 times. No other president did that. We don't know what Donald Trump's going to do. We don't know. What we do know is that he is surrounding himself with some free thinkers, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., who are advising. But we also know that he also is going to rely upon Jared Kushner and others to be in his inner circle. It creates. Normally, in foreign policy, you want a foundation of predictability. That's something that Ambassador Anatoly Antonov, the Russian ambassador to the United States, told me every time we meet, that the most important thing for him is predictability. Donald Trump is the opposite of predictability. He is unpredictability. He is chaos. And so people are going to be trying to meet with him to create a sense of predictability by seeking compromises with him. And this is his greatest strength. It's not about continuing the status quo ante. People are going to be coming in saying, we have to be willing up front to compromise. We need to reach a compromise early on to eliminate unpredictability, inject predictability so that we can move forward. And this is Donald Trump's greatest opportunity. He's a businessman and he understands these things. It's a transactional relationship. So there's great potential for good things to happen, but there's also great potential for horrible things to happen, because if the deal doesn't go the way he wants, the unpredictability factor comes in, fire and fury. With Iran, he was briefed by the intelligence service that Iran was trying to assassinate him. I will destroy Iranian cities. I will destroy Iranian towns. Really? That's stability. So I think that, the fear with Donald Trump is the absolute unpredictability of a Trump administration.
Right. The unpredictability is his greatest strength, but it's also his greatest weakness. And you think that any sort of lobbying with him is it's a race to who can get to him first, that sort of thing, who can incept in him an idea that, maybe you should side with Israel, you should side with Palestine. I would like to point out, however, he's been quite clear with his support for Israel in this particular election cycle. He's been very vocal about it, and including people like RFK, who, if I'm not wrong, RFK described Israel as a gunship carrier for us, as a bulwark in the Middle East. I thought that was very that imagery wasn't very, wasn't very appropriate with the kind of campaign that RFK Jr. was running otherwise. And he's been a very vocal supporter of the Zionist regime. It behooves me why, but he is quite supportive. So do you think that you see a more sympathetic Trump, and do you think you see a redoubling of the Jerusalem effort that he did? Because technically speaking, the 7th of October is sort of, can be indirectly blamed on Trump and him moving the capital to Jerusalem, and then, putting the Abraham Accords on the fast track with Jared Kushner working with the Saudis and the Israelis. So in a sense, his style of diplomacy might have created the situation we're in.
Well, I don't think he'll ever acknowledge that because he doesn't like to take blame. Remember, he's famous for saying, if it works, I get all the credit. If it doesn't work, blame the other guy.
Fair enough. Yeah.
What I will say this is Donald Trump is on record as saying that that he believes there needs to be a negotiated settlement in the Middle East. And he said there's only one side that doesn't want to negotiate, and that's the Israelis. So he knows where the problem lies.
Yeah, has he said that at some point?
Absolutely. Absolutely, he has said that. And the other thing is he will have to deal with the world as it is, not as he wants it to be. And I can say with absolute certainty, 100% certainty, that people in his campaign sat up and paid attention to what Iran did to Israel. And they're very concerned about the fact that Iran has demonstrated this missile-based deterrence capability, because it dictates what America can and can't do, regardless of who you are as president. And so rather than start his presidency by heading down a path towards a regional war, remember, he's running on a campaign that says, I never started a new war. I'll be the guy to keep you out of wars. That's his goal. And he said about the Iranian missile attack, he said, this never should have happened. If I were president, this wouldn't have happened. So his goal isn't to start a war. His goal is to stop a war. And so I do think that, the realities will dictate the policies. And the reality is that, Trump, in order to, and he made another statement about lifting sanctions. He said he didn't just talk about it in regards to Russia. He said with Iran as well. He said Iran has no options. We've taken away all options by keeping these sanctions on. Well, that implies that he's willing to listen to Iranian options. So I think that it's not as black and white when it comes to Israel as some people think. He will come out as, the staunch defender of Israel. But I think what he'll say is that at the end of the day, what's best for Israel and the United States is to avoid a war, and to try and find a compromise solution, that takes us down that path. So I'm not as again, it's Donald Trump, because you just don't know what's going to happen. But I'm not as, there's some people who are just saying absolutely he's 100% anything Israel wants, Israel gets, and I think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I suspect also that it's a lot more a lot of it is political posturing, in that not to disappoint the Jewish lobbies in America, as well as the that particular aspect of the voter base. And I think Donald Trump's a businessman. He likes to keep things open. He uses language that's vague. So, suggesting that should have never happened can mean both I would have destroyed Iran, and it can also mean that I would have never let that whole situation unfold that way through diplomatic or however possible political means that would have been employed. So he's sort of a careful, sort of, sneaky sort of businessman. And I suspect that his children and their spouses and the people around him are sort of semi-lobbyists for different camps. Like you mentioned, with Jared Kushner being a very staunch Zionist lobbyist. Thank you so much for your time again, and I hope that this will be beneficial for the people on the 7th of October. If there's anything you want to leave us with, a closing message or something to look forward to, or, you've scared us straight when it comes to nuclear weapons, in all honesty. I think we should just start this podcast with the duck and cover, the classic sort of, those videos from the 60s or 50s, I guess. What's the closing message with regards to the conflict right now for the Muslim world? Because you're speaking to a significant amount of them. It's about 2 billion of us here that speak English.
Well, the fact that you said I scared you with nuclear weapons is good. I want you scared. Now, I would prefer that a year from now, if we meet, you say, boy, you scared us. You shouldn't have done that. Okay, and then I say, well, you know what? We're alive. So, hooray. But the biggest danger is when we pretend a problem doesn't exist. When we think about something and we just wish it away, we don't want to talk about it. It becomes the elephant in the room. Nuclear weapons, Israeli nuclear weapons, are a huge problem that the world has ignored for far too long. And now we've come up to a situation where there is a realistic scenario in which Israel could be using its weapons in the near future. As somebody who spent his life trying to get rid of nuclear weapons, this is a dangerous, dangerous escalation, because all it does is encourage Iran to reverse course on its fatwa and suddenly decide that nuclear weapons are no longer haram, or is that the right word? Haram, prohibited?
Haram.
Haram. Sorry, hammam's a bath. Haram is for forbidden. Yeah. Okay, so forgive me, but forbidden. And so again, this is putting us in the wrong direction. And so I want you to be afraid, because I want you to start talking about it. I want you to start engaging on the subject. I want you to start asking questions and demanding answers. If you can't do it directly to your government, do it indirectly by creating a buzz on the internet. Because believe it or not, governments do pay attention to the direction of social media. And I would love nothing more than to have 2 billion people saying, we don't want to die in a nuclear war. What are we doing about this? Let's make Israeli nuclear weapons an issue. Let's make nuclear weapons an issue. Let's make nuclear disarmament a priority. Let's make disarmament talks, arms control, a priority. Now, I know that some nations don't want to talk about that. I'm sure Pakistan doesn't want to talk about nuclear weapons, but you have to, because the consequences of not talking about it is having nuclear weapons go off next door. And then you being in a squeeze between Israel and India, because you are now the Muslim bomb, and you'll be viewed as a threat by Israel. You don't want to talk about nuclear weapons? Don't. But don't be surprised when suddenly you find yourself in the nuclear crosshairs.
Israel has historically
historically
threatened our nuclear facilities. There was a British Airways flight. One of my relatives used to guard that flight. He was a F-16 squadron commander, and there was a particular British Airways airline that used to come every day, 8 a.m. in the morning, and their job was to follow it and to drop it if it veered off course even for an inch without communication, which is unprecedented to drop it without, because the idea was that the Israeli jets would be under the guise of the wings, and I'm actually from the original belt where we developed the first nuclear plant in Kahuta in the north of Punjab. So I'm from that region. So a lot of my relatives worked on the plant, the initial plants in the 70s and 80s. So I understand that the direct Israeli threat when it came to our nuclear assets, and I suspect that with a bit of luck and geography, we were able to get away with it, and maybe some American help. I don't know. So yeah, the nuclear option. Israeli nukes are the big question for the 21st century. We need to deal with, and then we can look at the nukes of the rest of the world as well. But Israel is a country that's shown a track record of tremendous violence. So we need to start there, and then we can go for the big guys, for India and Pakistan and for the Western world and Russia. Obviously, these are very sensitive subjects to deal with. You have to tiptoe on eggshells with these things, because the nuclear option, the nuclear weapons have practically become our whole foreign policy, by the way, for like at least 20 years. And they have become Pakistan's whole identity. And I think the Muslim bomb thing is a big throwback to back in the day when we actually used to call it the Muslim bomb. So, thank you, Scott. Thank you, sir, for your time. We'll keep pestering you whenever we need insight into certain issues. I hope we won't have to bother you about anything major coming up. And I hope the American elections are a bust and, nothing happens.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You scared us straight and all for nothing. I hope so.
Okay. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.